Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, April 29th, 2019. Don't talk to me about Game of Thrones. I usually love to talk about Game of Thrones. I didn't get to see it yesterday. I should have watched it. I know. I didn't go to the big movie either, the Avengers one. I didn't see enough of the previous ones for it to make any sense. And also, I don't care about that one. My kids love it. I like to take them to it. But I gave up my seat yesterday, and my wife took the kids and their friends to the movie without me because I had to give up the ticket because they were out of tickets, and I wanted the kids' friends to be able to go. And why should they not go if they love it? And I can't, make heads or tails of it, so I didn't go. And I TiVo'd Game of Thrones so that my wife would be able to watch it with me, and I don't know. I should have just watched it because now I've spent all the time since realizing it that I couldn't even waste my time on, hanging around looking at Twitter because Twitter would give it away. So I've spent all the time between last night and today putting mute values into my tweet deck here so that so I can avoid as many of the spoilers as possible. One of the big problems, of course, is that people refer to Game of Thrones on Twitter as GOT, and you can't block GOT where you don't see it. It's GOT, right? You can't see anything. So I can block the hashtag, and I can block the string value Game of Thrones with or without spaces, but you know how it is. It's a tough life out there, and other people are refugees or whatever. People get killed. It's all it's all bad. Is what I'm saying. It's been a crazy weekend. Greg Dworkin, no doubt, rounding up all the worst stories and then some of the best, just to top it off. And I've been particularly disturbed, I think, this weekend watching the news media try and get their hands around Trump's worst stuff from the weekend. I mean, I really think something that's qualitatively different and a quantum leap in the qualitative difference. Of course, referring to his remarks in Wisconsin, it's an escalating thing. He's said it or things like it before. Is anti-abortion rhetoric, and now getting to this really crazy, dangerous, outrageous stage. I mean, he's always been willing to go well above and beyond in any subject, abortion or otherwise, well beyond what could even be excused as just mere confusion or even partisan confusion about an issue, and now just basically calling for open murder of anybody that has anything to do or ever supported the idea of abortion. And there's a great thread out there that I should probably grab and show to you. I don't think it's something we're going to spend time reading on the show necessarily. It's something you probably should read on your own, quietly, contemplatively. But a great thread from a hospital and I guess an OBGYN nurse, delivery room nurse, who explains what is really happening. Very often Donald Trump, when he comes up with crazy stories like this, there's originally some germ of truth in there somewhere that he has either deliberately or otherwise misunderstood, misinterpreted, or twisted in some way to turn into this news story. And it's not him. He's just picking it up from whatever TV shows he's watching and whatever, idea they get in their twisted minds about this stuff. But he's talking about, of course, what amounts to palliative care for newborn infants who just don't have any chance of survival. And he's changed that into this stupid story he has about executing babies. And it kind of occurred to me over the weekend. I know there are people who are weak and susceptible to this sort of story, and people who are just Trump fans and liable to believe just about anything he says, or maybe they even showed up to the rally already believing it because they saw it on the same television show he saw it on, or the same corner of Facebook, or whatever it is. But I still, other than the fact that these people just don't do any sort of critical thinking at all about things like this, I just couldn't really fathom how you could be president of the United States and believe that this is happening somewhere in the country that you are in charge of nominally, and still spend your weekends golfing. I mean, if I obviously, the flip side of it is there's every chance that he doesn't believe this at all and is just using it to manipulate people, and that's entirely possible too. Although he's very, very dumb. I don't know how people really understand how. Well, I guess do people not understand how dumb I think he is? And I think that's fair to say. But it worries me that there are people who think that he's both a good man and a godly man and a truth teller, who thinks there are babies being murdered for no reason all over the country, everywhere, by people who identify as Democrats, and you can track them down and find them. And he says, now watch this drive. And then he doesn't let you watch the drive either. How could you spend that much time? Wouldn't you work weekends once in a while, I guess is my question, if you thought there was widespread infanticide going on in the country for no particular reason? Would you rest? I wouldn't. Is all I'm saying. But I'm relatively certain that what he's claiming is happening isn't happening. So I guess that's just the difference between him and me. I would take my responsibility as president seriously. On the other hand, nobody ever thought he was really going to do that. So I guess I haven't, discovered anything here. But I just can't imagine that being the case. And by the same token, you may have seen over the weekend, I was also annoyed with the fact that I don't understand how you could be the editor of a newspaper and say a good way to cover this would be to say 4 Pinocchios. How many Pinocchios does this get? I don't know. He's telling people to go murder doctors, and I'm not really sure. Because it could be one of those infinite Pinocchios. I mean, I guess, but imagine sitting there and looking at this and saying, what we need to do is put a Pinocchio metric to this. People need to know. He made 10,000 lies, and this one's a 4 Pinocchio one. Are his pants, in fact, on fire? Not really sure. Maybe they do wrap the baby beautifully. It can't be 100% lie. So I'm a little dissatisfied with the way this weekend came out, to say the least. Not just the movies and television. Greg Dworkin, you're here, probably because you have some festering dissatisfaction with the weekend, but I'm sure an optimistic attitude for the week ahead.
Well, I suppose. I haven't seen Endgame yet, the Avengers thing, because I'm still catching up. My son has me on a working schedule, so we just did Captain America Civil War last night, so I can catch up.
Well, all right.
And then I've got to do the Infinity Gauntlet one, and then I guess we get to see Endgame next week.
Right, and then Captain America.
But I don't
Heritage,
watch Game of Thrones, so don't give me Game of Thrones stuff.
Oh,
I won't give you any spoilers. It's impossible. I've never seen it.
Okay. Well, then you wouldn't mind if I spoiled it for you. Well, maybe you watch it in the future.
I don't care one way or the other, but I will tell you this.
Yes.
Back in September of 2018, when Bob Woodward wrote his book, Fear of Trump in the White House, this Politico article starts out. This is the headline. Idiot, dope, moron. How Trump's aides have insulted the boss. So it's not that you think he's an idiot. It's that people who work with him think he's an idiot.
Well, they're the ones who know best.
They would. They have day-to-day experience knowing that he's a complete, total jerk. Now, what he said is the baby is born. The mother meets with the doctor. They take care of the baby. They wrap the baby beautifully. And then the doctor and the mother determine whether or not they will execute the baby. Yes. I mean, I have to tell you, I'm a lung doc. I'm a pediatrician. I go in the office every morning, schedule visits with kids, and I discuss with mom how we're going to execute them.
Yes, I thought
that's what we do. That's our job.
Well, okay, so I misunderstood that part. You do execute everybody.
So, it's no wonder I'm just glad to straighten that out. Yes, that's sarcasm.
So poor,
I mean, I can't tell you how infuriating it is to read something like that, because that is just so far from the truth.
Yes.
And, of course, what's equally infuriating, is the New York Times, with Trump repeats a false claim that doctors execute newborns. He's freaking lying, okay? Right. Say it. What the hell is wrong with you?
I don't know why they can't get that. I mean, you'd think that they could nail that down once in a while. But, like we're watching, gee whiz, I don't know, impeachment might not be the right thing.
By the way, that's the way I do my visits in the office.
Oh,
Hi,
yeah.
how are you? I'm Dr. Dworkin. You have a
Friggin'
lovely kid. What the hell is wrong with you? Let's talk about executing.
That's a good way of doing it.
It
I don't
breaks
know why
the
they
ice.
can't.
It's really good for people who are very shy and retiring like me, and who have a little bit of difficulty meeting new people each time, and every new visit is a new person. I'm an introvert, not an extrovert. So the way to break the ice is just to scream at them that I'm going to execute their kids, because then the rest of the visit goes really well.
Right. Well, as long as you wrap them beautifully, I don't think it matters.
To take their asthma inhaler, and breathe properly. So it's not as bad. My grandmother always said it could always be worse.
Yes.
So not killing your kid, just take your medicine.
Okay. Well,
now, this is a thread from Julia Pulver.
That's the one.
Who is a NICU nurse.
Yes.
And that's neonatal ICU. I've been there. I've worked there. I've done this. It's horrible, but she describes it well. As a NICU nurse, I served on the bereavement team. We were a special team of nurses tough enough to help new parents go through the worst days of their lives, parents of babies who had fought so hard for their tiny little lives and weren't going to make it, and parents of babies who, after they were born, wouldn't have their mom's body keeping them alive, so they would die rather quickly. As these small bodies were failing, it was our job to be there with the parents at every step, give them support, and do our best to make some memories of their precious babies that could help ease their impending and overwhelming grief. When heroic measures failed, or a baby without a brain or working lungs or a heart were born, we knew the end was near. We encouraged the parents to be present in those final moments. And by the way, you can't replace those things with machines, at least not yet. We placed the babies skin to skin with mom and placed a blanket over them both. We lowered the lights, quieted the room. We sang songs, we prayed, we hugged, we swayed, we all cried. We put a lock of hair in a ribbon. We measured the baby's length and marked it on a tape measure. We made special tiny white gowns and hats. We created a memory box for those families who were losing their child that day. This is heart-wrenching. It's meant to be. It's supposed to be.
Yes.
It is. That's not executing babies. That's what doctors and nurses do in these moments. And I can't begin to tell you how offensive it is for Trump to say something like that.
Well, yeah. I mean,
she concludes, no one ever in any hospital, nor any mother who has just given birth, is conspiring with a doctor on whether or not to commit infanticide. This is perhaps one of the sickest accusations levied by this deranged dictator. Yet, don't believe a word he says about anything important, is how she ends her tweet thread. And that's a great message.
Yes, that's the one. That's the one I was thinking of, and I wasn't sure I could read all the way through it, but I'm glad you got it out there. And I'll include it, of course, in the roundup. You can all take a look. There are other additional touches to it that just make the point more poignantly that this is something very emotional for the doctors, the nurses, and the families. Of course, the families. You might not think necessarily that the doctors and nurses get emotionally involved in it, but what also amazed me about this is everything that usually abortion opponents insist is due to every child, including those who might not live but a few hours outside the womb. And these people are doing think about it, they're singing songs, praying, hugging, taking locks of hair, making footprints. They're doing all the things that everybody of all, wherever they stand on abortion, insist be done for newborn babies, even those that are about to die.
Yeah,
and
but once
imagine
they're born,
being
they just
strung up for
turn their backs and walk away.
Yeah. Imagine being strung up for it and being called a murderer for providing, being on the bereavement team and holding the hands of all these mothers and helping them come to terms with this.
The strength and compassion you need to be on a bereavement team and do this more than once is just incredible. And, I think it highlights a couple of important points about Trump that we tend to forget among all the other stuff. A lot of his aides, Stephen Miller especially, but a lot of his other aides as well, are basically evil people who plan things. They don't plan them well. They're not very competent. We can see what happens at the southern border when Miller tries to push through a policy that says that let's not only cut legal immigration in half, but let's round up everybody and put them in camps. That's basically his policy. But his plan. Trump doesn't plan. All right. His issue here is twofold. Firstly, yeah, he's really that stupid and doesn't fully understand the ramifications. But more importantly, he totally doesn't care. Absolutely devoid of any compassion, empathy, or any other emotion that would make him understand what a bereavement team even is. It's not that he's lying about that. He truly doesn't get it because he has absolutely no emotion. He's empty, soulless, where that part of a human being normally is. So it becomes very easy for him to do that. It's the same lack of something, some sort of humanic, spark that allows him to be a world-class grifter. If you don't believe in anything, you can lie with a straight face to multiple people, no matter how many times you've hurt them, and you don't really care that you've hurt them. And that's why there's a Trump Stakes, Trump's University, Trump everything that just, crushes people who believe in him in its wake. This is who he is to his core. And so it's hard, I think. The only defense of the New York Times I could possibly think of for not just saying that the president's lying is the recognition that I don't think he would understand what a lie is. He's a confabulator. He's a fabulist. He's Baron von Munchausen. So,
in which case, that's another thing to say.
Yeah, I mean, just call him a fabulist. But, I can understand why you have a trouble, drawing a distinction between that particular thing he said was a lie because he knew it was, and that particular thing wasn't really a lie because it's such a large part of a warped fantasy that he's built for himself that it's the old Seinfeld show, Jerry. It's not really lying if you believe it.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I think it would be just as alarming and maybe just as effective if you can't bring yourself to say it's a lie, then print "This president thinks it's true." That's just as bad. I would settle for that. And if you're going to say, if you can't, I can't say he's a lying sack of crap. Well, how about starting by saying he's a sack of crap, and then we'll work on the rest.
Well, I'd settle for the president is lying for political purposes because this is all about his base. It is entirely and totally trying to make sure that he doesn't lose a single evangelical vote that put him in office because he can't afford to. Everybody else hates him.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, again, all the people who are doing all the things that the evangelicals say they wish for are working on the bereavement team, singing and praying for babies that aren't going to survive. Well, I mean, I don't think Donald Trump has ever. I don't know. Forget about it. There's no chance that he ever did anything to raise a child. Obviously.
No, of course he's. And who's on that team? Who are his best friends? People like Franklin Graham. I mean, you couldn't be a bigger first class phony. But that's how you wind up in the cabinet. That's how you wind up being his friend. That's how, David Pecker, who puts blackmail in safes and then builds an empire. Having them do things as favors because he's got secrets. I mean, these are the folks who the American people in their infinite wisdom decided would be best serving the country by putting them in the White House. And we're still paying the consequences for that, which is why impeachment is a subtext to virtually everything that happens from this point onward after the Mueller report. That's another topic, but it's all tied into the same thing. The American people understand he's a rotten human being. I don't think they fully understand how rotten, but they get the idea.
Yes,
Poll after poll after poll says, I don't really think he's a good person. I don't trust him, and I know he lies. However,
there it is.
There's the however part. And what's fascinating to me is watching little bits and pieces of his base come to the realization that, maybe we made a mistake. Take Wisconsin, for example.
All right.
Did you know that Wisconsin used to have a thriving dairy market?
Sure.
This is in the New York Times. Stung by Trump's trade wars, Wisconsin milk farmers face extinction. Extinction.
What
Not
are they
just
going to wear on
part-time
their heads?
Extinction. He's going to get rid of Wisconsin's ability to actually sell milk.
How can you do that?
You make the tariff so high you can't afford to sell it, and so they'll turn to slaughtering the animals and selling beef.
Are they going to wrap them beautifully?
Maybe they'll stick feathers on them and claim it's chicken. I don't know what they're going to do, but it's incredibly bad for the entire system.
I would say so. I don't know what they're going to wear on their heads at football games now.
Wisconsin happens to be a pivotal swing state.
Yes,
Trump cannot win without Wisconsin.
What's his name? The data guy, Brad Parscale, I guess, was on TV saying, well, we're going to flip New Hampshire, New Mexico, and I forget what else. So maybe they're swapping it out for Wisconsin,
Pennsylvania, Michigan. Good job.
I hope that happens, I guess, although I'd feel bad for poor people in New Hampshire and New Mexico.
I'm not sure New Hampshire
have this hang around their neck.
Dumb, but we'll see.
For
decades, the Times says, Denise and Tom Murray rose before 5 a.m., shuffled through mud and snow to milk cows on the farm that had been their family since 1939. 30s, huh? What happened in the 30s that would make people, vote Democratic?
Yeah. Almost, I wonder if he bought it at a fire sale off of somebody else who went to vote Democratic. I don't know.
Been right before the war. This month, after years of falling milk prices and mounting debt, the Murrays sold their last milk cow, taking pictures while holding back tears as the final one was loaded onto a truck and taken away. It's hard to see him go out the last time, said Ms. Murray at 53. It's scary because you don't know what your next paycheck's going to be. Wisconsin is known as America's Dairyland, but the milk makers who gave the state its moniker are vanishing, falling prey to a variety of impediments, including President Trump and his global trade war. That's just one of many. There's the soybeans issue and things that are grown in Iowa and the heartland. And, Trump is responsible for this. And the idea that, they'll just forgive him everything, that ain't going to happen. Sure, there'll be people who will. But as a group, I don't think he's going to win those states. Wisconsin's still close. Michigan, he's doing very poorly. Pennsylvania, I think he's doing very poorly. I suspect he'll lose Wisconsin. I'm pretty confident he's going to wind up losing Michigan and Pennsylvania. Without those, he's not president. So you can talk all you want about, he still got his 40% and he only, panders to the base and so on and so forth. But, he's just not doing well. Now, what do you do about it? Do you have to wait for an election to do anything? Well, Washington Post ABC News poll came out over the weekend and has yet another take on this, which is similar to the others. Jennifer Rubin summed it up very nicely. This is in the pundit roundup leading off.
Okay.
Pelosi was right about impeachment. Did I give you the pundit roundup today?
I have it.
There you go. It was my first thing I gave you.
Okay.
The Post-ABC News poll shows that clear majorities of Americans oppose impeachment, 56%, disapprove of President Trump's performance, 54%. He's 39% with all adults, 42%, I think, with registered voters. Think Mueller's report did not exonerate Trump, 53%, and think the president lied to the country about the events documented in the special counsel's report, 58%. So they know he's a liar. They know he's not exonerated. They don't like his performance, but they don't necessarily want to see him impeached. Now, he's starting at like 38% or so, 37%. I don't remember the exact number. But Monmouth, CNN, there's a number of polls that all showed that support for impeachment is somewhere between 37 and 40%, whereas don't impeach is well into the mid-50s. And yet, Nixon started at 19 before televised hearings happened with Sam Ervin and the Senate. And those weren't impeachment hearings. Those were fact-finding hearings.
Yes.
The impeachment hearings were Peter Rodino in the House. And by then, toward the very end, all of a sudden, a majority of the public thought that Nixon should go. So Trump is actually starting out much worse than Nixon was when Nixon started, even though Trump has the advantage of a propaganda network or two, Fox and Sinclair. Nonetheless, sentiment to impeach him is double what it was for Nixon at the start. What it will be at the end remains to be seen, but the only way you know how to get there is with hearings. So the hearings are the thing. I am a big fan of not saying the quiet parts out loud. You don't have to call them impeachment hearings. They're fact-finding hearings. They're investigatory.
Sure,
they're congressional mandated. It's perfectly appropriate to do. And in fact, as the Democratic House attempts to do this, you see the pushback from the president, which is only adding to yet another article of impeachment. Right now, the big fight is over William Barr and his testimony. He's supposed to come to judiciary, but judiciary hired, I think, one of the Mueller prosecutors, and they want the prosecutor to ask the questions, not the House members, which is really smart because people who do this for a living do this better than politicians do.
Yes.
So, of course, Barr doesn't want to do that, and he's balking, and he may not go. And if he doesn't go, then the House subpoenas, and then you start your constitutional crisis. So that's where we're at right now, and that's the big event to watch at the moment.
Well, as long as we're there already, we can finally.
You don't have to call that impeachment. Just watch how that plays out.
Yeah, that's true. And let me see if I can find it. But on that particular topic, I think it was. Let's see, whose tweets was it? Mark Schmidt tweeting this morning with his just brief comment on that fact, the fight over the terms of Barr's testimony that is letting the committee counsel ask questions. He points out, quite correctly, is an implicit indictment of behavior of Democratic members in oversight in general, not the oversight committee per se, but in oversight in general, talking more than asking, framing questions for sound bites rather than logical sequence. Very many members do.
Not everybody's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Exactly. Dropping one line of questions abruptly for the next. Also, Dems' failure to align lines of questioning with other members and to force an answer, breaking the flow with random questions about district interests. And then he goes on to cite Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and colleagues who have shown a better approach to oversight. And if Nadler could get his committee in line, counsel questions wouldn't be quite so necessary. I thought it was an interesting observation. They can still recover. But
it's true, but to the point, Nadler has a right to do this. After all, as you and I talk on the show all the time, he's got the gavel. He can structure the committee any damn way he wants.
Right, including an effective way that would actually, perhaps be more effective in driving public opinion, and maybe
which is what Barr is objecting to.
Yes, right. I mean, that needs to be said above and beyond all of it. He's trying to avoid any possibility where he'll be effectively questioned. That's not so good. But okay, I hope they're organizing for it. And, so okay, you get the council to do it if you can't organize the members that way. Good answer. All right, we'll be back in 2 minutes with more good answers, I think, or at least some good questions. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We are still with Greg here, and I'm trying to figure out, I'm having difficulty with my Skype this morning, but at least the sound works. That's the main thing. And that would really be a problem, but okay.
By the way, before I forget, I just want to remind everybody, Teacher of the Year is Rodney Robinson. And the fact that he's black has nothing to do with the fact that Trump refuses to go to the Teacher of the Year.
Yes, right, absolutely. I'm sure it's a good reason.
Or to honor, people like Johanna Hayes.
Yes, right, true. Also, apparently that's what
he doesn't
they say.
go. It's just like one of these things he doesn't do.
He didn't do the White House Correspondents' Dinner over the weekend, which had partially, I guess, was responsible for the effect of having it pass without anybody noticing, which is, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, I'm sure he's actually satisfied with that. Nobody watched because I wasn't there. Right. But also, there was some other important happenings over the weekend.
There were, including the shooting in San Diego at the Chabad, where a Israeli Jewish woman who was there threw herself in front of the bullet to save the rabbi's life. Got herself killed. The rabbi lost a finger. It was interesting that this 19-year-old, whose name I will not mention, who used this AR-15 to try to run up a score, dressed the usual way, was egged on by 8chan, captured and copied, because he's not very original. The manifesto from New Zealand cited him and others like him as his inspiration. In fact, got very poor scores from the 8chan followers because the anonymous trolls who were egging him on didn't like the fact he only killed one person, and he was supposed to live stream it but accidentally left his YouTube channel on private so nobody could see it. So they said, you totally screwed up. You're not very good at this. We don't like you.
Well, then, I don't know. I guess we'll take that. I mean, usually these things go slightly differently. So he's alive, and it will get back to him in prison that 8chan hates him. So
right.
All right. Maybe that's not the... I mean... I don't know what to tell you. I guess if you jump into the timeline after the shooting has happened, so you can't intervene and stop that, I guess you could at least take that. I don't know. What a weird. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I forgot. I mean, we're certainly inured to the mass shootings because it was one of, I think, 3 over the weekend. Just one of which happened.
This is a big one,
though,
because of the anti-Semitism and the hate nature of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I mean, we have mass shootings that we ignore all the time because there's no storyline to it beyond horrible violence and guns are a problem. We know that, so we tend to skip over them. But, yeah, this one made headlines, and, here we are again. There was a number of alt-right incidents over the weekend also, not any of them nearly as violent, thankfully, but just as annoying and disturbing, while the president is out there whipping it up again.
Right. So on a related matter to the impeachment and where Trump historically stands in terms of bad numbers for him, and yet still has a floor, he always has that narrow range that he goes in.
Yeah.
He's got a solid floor, but he's also got a solid ceiling that doesn't go above. Got to have a solid
floor under him, yeah.
Excuse me. Okay. So John Stower is a Yale poli-sci guy.
Yeah, okay.
And he has a little thread here. He says, part of the challenge for the Democrats is getting the Washington press corps to understand fully that the president's 40% approval rating, give or take, is not simply the result of voter approval. It's the result of an international right-wing media apparatus, primarily Fox, that lies and propagandizes for the president to keep him in power. Moreover, this media apparatus is amplified by a Russian government that's come to recognize common purpose between the Kremlin and the Republican Party. One intersection of that you could see, of course, is we didn't have any problems over the weekend, so thanks for watching NRA meetings that are taking place right now.
Yes.
We should not fail to mention that because that's an interesting story. The Washington press corps does not see or will not see the magnitude of the problem. As a result, the press tends to look at the debate over impeaching Donald Trump as a constitutional argument entirely contained within the Democratic Party, which is not the case. Decades of information warfare by a right-wing media apparatus, and that's not an overstatement, joined later by Russian operatives seeking to violate American sovereignty, have created new political conditions in which normal intra-party considerations often don't apply. And continuing to apply them warps reality. I would say the same thing about Trump's lying and lack of compassion. You try to cover him as if he's a normal human being. He is not a normal human being. This is an existential problem. I don't have a ready solution. Whatever it is, however, I think it should involve getting the Washington press corps to understand fully that the president's approval rating is not the result of self-directing good faith individuals arriving at conclusions based on fact and reason. It's a result of ignorance, fear, prejudice, and a right-wing media apparatus that lies to people. Jay Rosen put it this way. It's as if 1/3 of the public is broken off from the rest of the electorate and isolated in an information system of its own. It's not only that they're inclined to trust the president more than the news system. It's the White House and Trump himself for trying to eviscerate the whole idea of a public record or of an independent sources of facts on which a country can disagree and argue about. That goes way beyond the notion of bias in the media. You could see that with Trump's comments that praising Robert E. Lee and reclaiming that his Charlottesville comments had to do with defending people who want to defend Lee's statues. Mm-hmm. How you go from Jews will not replace us and neo-Nazis to Robert E. Lee, I don't know, but he found it not difficult to do. Partly because his base supports both.
Yes.
right? So it was a common, easy thing. He doesn't care. He's from Queens.
Right.
Oh, I grew up admiring Robert E. Lee. No, you didn't.
Yeah, right.
Queens,
I'm sure.
come on.
Yeah, probably not. But, it being heritage, not hate, yada, yada. Could be from anywhere. It's not his heritage either, but the thing is, once he looked at an apartment building in
Your
a
name is
state
Corey
that liked
Stewart,
it.
You're from the Midwest and you plant yourself in Virginia and claim that you're a son of the Confederacy? I don't think so.
Yeah, well, he's done weirder things.
Anyway, so there's this whole idea here that the press is propping him up in regard to the propaganda outlets like Sinclair and Fox, which reach a lot of people that we don't see. And at the same time, the White House Correspondents' Dinner that you referred to that nobody watched was actually a defense of freedom of the press and a call for the press to stop getting used like a rag doll that the president rails against. You have to get beyond that and start, covering him a little tougher, which I think was a pretty good speech and a pretty good idea.
Certainly necessary, and I wish
that was just as necessary as somebody like Michelle Wolf making fun of Trump.
Yes, absolutely. I wish we could have edited it in real time and thrown in something about it. Yeah. And so those of you here from the papers that said, what? How did they put it exactly in the Times that he repeated an inaccurate refrain?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Here's what we need you guys to do. Now have your dinner.
Yeah.
All right.
So I'm going to try to see if I can just find quickly Olivier Knox, who's the president of the White House Correspondents Association. He had some nice things to say about it after. But that doesn't mean I can type Olivier correctly.
Oh, well. That's not easy to do.
It's always corrected to Oliver, no matter what I do.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Right.
Well, we'll wait. Abby will wait.
Okay, so what does he say? Everything is video here. We can't lose track of attacks of the free press in a global context.
Okay.
And everybody's clapping and saying, well said, except it's all video, so I can't really just read to you what he said.
Oh, I see. Yeah, okay.
My crying son asked, is Trump going to put me in prison?
Oh, his son did?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
White House Correspondents Association President Olivier Knox hitting all the right press notes in his opening address. I have to see if we can get the transcript there. It shouldn't need to be said to a room full of people who understand the power of words, but the enemy of the people isn't a pet name, a punchline, or presidential, among other things that he said. So everybody's complimenting him in the press, and we're just, saying, okay, great, I like him. He's a really good guy. I'm trying not to say, okay, where have you been the last 2 years? Because I know that he's been pushing back for everything from lying Sarah Huckabee Sanders to how the press is treated in general. But, of course, White House Correspondents Association does have limited power. And the members are kind of staid and not necessarily, clear on what their role is supposed to be. You could see that whenever you start to argue with them about, well, why did you cover Hillary Clinton's emails the way you did, New York Times, and they get all defensive about it.
Yes. And I suppose had things come out differently.
So John Storr's thing that I read to you, I think, is right on the money. You really have to figure out in this new world how you're going to cover a guy who's deliberately going to lie to your face and spit at you, and yet has the president of the United States and cloaks himself in that so that with dignity you can't, react the way you would normally like to react, which is to punch him in the nose.
Yes. So was this what you were reading me, was that a store tweet thing?
Yeah, it's in your new list on Twitter now as a thread, I think. And
I
if
think
not,
so.
it
I
will
have
be.
his feed open so I can root it out, I hope.
Let's see. I have it right here. So
I gotta figure out
haven't
what's up
given you
with
everything. I'll give you this one
Wow,
now.
jeez.
There it is.
Okay. I'll wait on it. Okay. So there it is. Okay. You got it from Threadreader. Okay.
Well, I put it together in Threadreader so I could find it without losing it.
Thanks very much. Okay, that makes it easy.
It's the way I do pocket I don't do Pocket, but I do
Yeah,
that.
right. Well, maybe if I switched to that, then my Skype would work. It has nothing to do with it, but
Maybe. Another one that I want to highlight, which is also in that very same vein, and I'll have to remember this is habit here. I'm putting it in your Twitter feed and not
yeah.
Skype. How Trump's ego increases America's risk from white supremacists and Russian hackers, and this is Will Bunch writing in the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Okay. Got it.
Violent white nationalism had a horrible, horrible moment in America on Saturday that was punctuated on a sun-soaked morning in California when the pop-pop-pop of an AR-15 semi-automatic in the hands of a 19-year-old, barely a man, shattered the peace of a Passover service at a synagogue in Poway, California, however that's pronounced, Poway, Poway,
No idea.
near San Diego. San Diego. 60-year-old woman named Lori Gilbert Kay was killed by the gunfire. She jumped in front of her congregation's rabbi. That was not a made-up story. That's what she actually did.
Yeah.
Who'd already had a couple of fingers blown off by a bullet. 2 others were wounded, all in service of the gunman's insane rants. By the way, the rabbi finished his sermon because you can't interrupt the rabbi. That's just like, you don't do that.
Try it.
It was the exact same white supremacist baloney that caused another man with an AR-15 to, are you finding a theme here about AR-15s?
Yes.
To slaughter 11 Jews in a Pittsburgh synagogue exactly 6 months earlier to the day. And there were more storm clouds on the horizon in a popular Washington bookstore at virtually the same time as the latest synagogue shooting. A crowd of so-called white identitarians with a bullhorn showed up to disrupt the author of a book on racial resentment called Dying of Whiteness, chanting, "This land is our land."
Yes, I did see that video. Those guys were clever enough to mug directly into the camera, so all the usual Twitter detectives are already at work on freezing those frames and saving them and identifying them one at a time, and I think I've seen 2 of them named so far, so look out if you were there and marching and have a job that you like. One of them was I think a Boeing lobbyist, actually, which is pretty incredible.
So Will Bunch says, well, you know, all of that may be true, but let's be honest. The failure of AG Bill Barr's Justice Department to move heaven and earth to keep Hassan, that Coast Guard guy who was let loose,
yes, we haven't even
keep
mentioned
Hassan in custody,
Saturday.
or even issue a press release alerting the public is symbolic of a giant blind spot in our nation's capital when it comes to the deadly threat posed by white supremacy. And that giant buck stops at the desk of President Trump. Although the U.S. policy on white homegrown terror has been abysmal since the turn of the century, this president, with his vainglorious refusal to admit that an immoral strain of white nationalism helped elect him in 2016, and his administration are making the problem much, much worse. And then goes on and cites other examples.
Yeah, I have not caught up with.
Abominable thing is that white nationalist terror isn't the only area where Trump and his government is looking the other way, part because of our narcissistic president's over-the-top vanity, and in part because things that threaten the U.S. democracy often seem to be good news for the current occupant. And then that's where the Russian election interference comes in. And it's hard to imagine a greater threat to American democracy and freedom than foreign election interference and computer crimes. But doing what needs to be done will be very, very hard when an egomaniacal autocrat sits behind the resolute desk with his tiny hands clasped firmly over his ears, determined to muffle any ideas that might tarnish his legacy, let alone jeopardize the second term he needs to cement his authoritarian legacy, and maybe keep him out of jail. America wakes up on a grim Sunday morning to the realization, this is a Sunday column, that we're fighting a war against hate with a yawning black hole at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue where its commander is supposed to be. And I think that's right.
Yes, and you know what? They got the picture of that black hole, and it was orange. I noticed that.
Yeah. All right.
Yes.
That's it for me.
Oh. All right, now what? I just go
now what?
The rest of
I
it?
leave. You do the rest of the show, and we'll collect stuff,
Heavy
and we'll
sigh.
do it again on Wednesday. Hopefully by then
right.
Skype is working.
Yeah, I hope so. I would love to know. They must have updated it because it doesn't work anymore. That's pretty annoying. At least the audio works, and that's the key to
Well,
it.
the audio works, and I can send you stuff.
Yeah.
I'm sending it in the same channel that I'm talking with you, so I know it's the right David Waldman. At least it's not at mine.
I don't know. You're probably using Invisible Ink.
Yeah, I suppose. Talking to an imaginary
I will
friend.
try. I'm going to rub a lemon on my computer.
Like
and I'll be right
Harvey
back.
and...
Yeah, It's that kind of week. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Greg. And
you're welcome, David.
I will collect all of these things and pass them on to everybody. And thanks for reading through was it Julia Pulver tweets for us.
That would be the one.
Okay. Well, I'll include those in the roundup as well. And that I see is on your list anyway.
About nurses, right?
Good things.
Well, if you save a life, you're a hero.
Yes.
If you save 100 lives, you're a nurse.
That's it.
That's it.
That's all you get. Just
every freaking day.
Yeah, right. And boy, did people treat them poorly too. All right. Some people don't. That's nice.
Pay them more.
Yeah, that would be good.
There's a pro tip from a doctor.
Right. I mean, they worry less about being treated poorly. Well, they usually say, "I don't get paid enough for this treatment." Well, what if I did?
Okay. Well, we're going to raise your pay.
Yeah.
We'll treat you lousy, but
quite honestly, people would still say, "You know what? It still sucks." Treat people nicely. Period. That helps, but also pay them.
Right.
All right.
Take care of your staff. Patients come and go, but the staff you have to work with every day. And so pick a good staff and, treat them like family. Take care, and I will talk with you on Wednesday.
All right. Very good. Thanks, Greg. Stay well and treat your nurses well. All right. Okay. We'll continue on here and dive into Pocket. I wish I knew what was going on with Skype, but can only describe the problem to you as baffling. The audio works fine. The call came in fine. Usually there's text chats that you can have alongside your discussions. And the system itself is working. Justice's morning text notes that just let me know that everything is going fine and the program is streaming as usual came through just fine. Greg's just didn't, and I don't know. That could be, who knows? That could be just something going on my end, on his end, whatever. But thankfully, he's sent us most of these links by direct message. Is there anything I can click on here? No, I guess not. All right, and we'll just sort of patch them into our list later on. It's a little bit more difficult, but nothing we can't handle. Okay, so what we really can't handle is the transition back to running the show ourselves. Let me grab what's in Pocket and what's been occupying my mind on Twitter over the last day or two to mine for further content. Here's something sort of out of the blue I noticed from Talking Points Memo. Who wrote this one up? Let's see. Nicole LaFond. Is this one of their own things? Yes, it's just a summary of a Washington Post story, so maybe we'll skip over to that. Trump privately complains about Betsy DeVos, but won't give her the boot. Well, he won't give anybody anything, but the boot, that we wouldn't mind seeing her get. Behind closed doors, Nicole writes, President Trump complains about his Education Department Secretary Betsy DeVos and insults her intelligence, which is kind of hilarious in a way, according to the Washington Post. But he has no intention of kicking her out of the administration, primarily because he is not passionate about education. That's what it comes down to. And DeVos has managed to avoid the brand of scandal that has dismantled many of his other cabinet secretaries. DeVos reportedly believes she has a good relationship with Trump that involves monthly phone calls, her aides told the Post. But White House officials told the Post that the relationship is less stable. They rarely speak, and Trump has been irked in the past by her mistakes, especially her confirmation hearing. I don't recall that as being terribly, as anything, really, honestly. I'm sure she did a terrible job, but that's just because she is who she is. The best people and all that, yada, yada. I don't know. I don't know. I think I probably will skip the Post article about it, although I'm kind of curious to see how they put it and why I didn't. Maybe that's it. Why wasn't my attention grabbed by the headline, Betsy DeVos emerges a Trump cabinet survivor? That's a much less interesting headline than the one that the TPM guys put on it. So good for you over at TPM, making a much more interesting story out of it. All right. Let's see. Other items in Pocket. Just thought we would note that one for the record. Yes. This something that I think belongs tacked on to the end of a longer list that I am pretty sure I thought we had put in Pocket. I'm finding a lot of times I'm not certain how well Pocket is working at really capturing what I think I'm putting away there, unless I had put it in, unless I had just retweeted it. But I had thought I had seen over the weekend or heading into the weekend a compilation of the areas in which, there it is, the Washington Post had put together. Paul Waldman, no relation, again, in case anyone was wondering, writing in the plumb line with Greg Sargent. This Republicans everywhere are waging a desperate battle against democracy. I mean, I think this is a trend you've all noticed by now. But this, I think, was meant to be first, maybe not the first, but a stab at putting together a list of all of these different fronts on which Republicans are, in fact, fighting hard to prevent democracy from prevailing anywhere. And there's another story out of Michigan that may or may not have made the list. If it's not on the list, then I'll turn to David Neer's discussion of it and add that to it. Paul writes this on the 26th of April. We are 2 years removed from an election in which the Republican nominee became president despite getting 3 million fewer votes than the Democrat. 6 months removed from a midterm election in which Democrats won sweeping victories at all levels. And by the way, only part of what they should have won, given the percentage of the vote they got. If we were any sort of a parliamentary system, there'd be an overwhelming majority in the House. And for that matter, a Democratic majority in the Senate as well. But I'll continue on with the way Paul puts it. We are also 18 months away from the next presidential election. The Republican Party is in a panic, as well it should be, not just because its leader is extremely unpopular, but because its electoral coalition is shrinking as a proportion of the population. That's always good news. In response, Republicans are waging a scorched earth campaign against democracy itself. The latest news on this front comes out of Michigan. Okay, so I know we'll get that included in the list, where a panel of federal judges just ordered the legislature to redraw its district maps after finding that the state's extreme gerrymander, undertaken by Republicans, violated the rights of Democratic voters. And I think actually there's even more from Michigan that we'll turn to David for in a minute. Evidence from numerous sources demonstrates that the map drawers and legislators designed the enacted plan with the specific intent to discriminate against Democratic voters, the judges wrote. Let's take a little tour around the country, Paul says, to see some of the other blows that Republicans are trying to strike against democracy. In Missouri, Republican state legislators are attempting to undo a constitutional amendment passed overwhelmingly by the state's voters last November. Let the voters decide. By the way, yeah, keep that in mind, please, Democratic leaders, when you say, well, we can't do impeachment, we can't talk about impeachment, we shouldn't even hint at impeachment. We're almost at an election. We're not. We're very far away from an election. And we'll let the voters decide. Well, let me just remind you that when the voters decide, the voters don't even decide. In Missouri, Republican state legislators are attempting to undo a constitutional amendment, the ultimate voters deciding. A constitutional amendment passed overwhelmingly by the state's voters last November, which took the power to redistrict out of the hands of the legislature, because they suck at it, and gave it to a nonpartisan state demographer, because it's imagined that that person won't suck at it. In Florida, after voters overwhelmingly chose to restore voting rights to felons after they served their sentences, the Republican-controlled state House passed a bill requiring felons to pay all court fines, fees, and restitution before they are allowed to exercise their right to vote. In other words, a poll tax. In Tennessee, Republicans are moving to impose a raft of restrictions. Raft. He likes rafts too. Paul does. It's a Waldman thing. Impose a raft of restrictions on voter registration drives. That's terrible, right? You can't have voter registration in this country. Raft of restrictions on voter registration drives, including the possibility of jail time for organizers who file faulty registration forms, even though those who register voters are legally required to submit all the forms they receive, even if they contain mistakes. In Texas, maybe you've heard of it, it's a large state, the state Senate passed a bill imposing harsh criminal penalties for people who make mistakes on their own voter registration forms. In Arizona, Republicans are pushing a bill that would throw voters off the mail-in ballot list if they failed to vote early in either a primary or general election in 2 consecutive elections. How do you like that? That's a bizarre one. If it becomes law, hundreds of thousands of Arizonans will likely lose the ability to vote by mail. So in other words, if you want to get it, like an app, I guess, I don't know whether they refer to them as absentee ballots. You want to vote by mail. If you didn't also vote by mail in any of the in any 2 consecutive elections, what is even the basis of that? I mean, it's usually, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. It's just nuts. And 2 consecutive? I mean, all right, well, whatever. I think Trump would be off the list that way. In Washington, D.C., the Supreme Court is poised to allow the Trump administration to add a citizenship question to the census. We've heard about that enough times and followed it, with the obvious intent of discouraging people discouraging people in immigrant communities from answering, thereby making those communities look smaller than they are and depriving them of political power. This kind of thing has been going on for a while. Republicans, when they win an election, one of the first things that they do is change the rules to increase the chances that even if they lose the next election, they will still retain power. That's above and beyond all the structural elements of our system that enable minority rules, such as the disproportionate power given to small states in the Senate and the Electoral College that has allowed Republicans to become president with fewer votes than their opponents in 2 of the past 5 elections. Anyway, we'll get back to the exciting conclusion of Waldman's list here, plus add one more episode from Michigan above and beyond that. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. You're on Netroots Radio. Let's see, we were reading through Paul Waldman's entry in the Plum book here, or the Plum line, rather. Confusing my plums. But let's see. He was rounding up incidents from around the country wherein was made manifest. How about that? The Republican intention to close off all avenues of democracy that might perhaps lead to a loss of power or any other sort of defeat for them. This thing has been going on for quite a while. When Republicans win an election, reminder, one of the first things they do is usually to change the rules to increase the chances that even if they lose the next one, they will still retain power. That's above and beyond all the structural elements of our system that enable minority rule, and of course, including disproportionate power given to small states in the Senate, not to mention filibuster rules, the Electoral College, et cetera, and the way it screwed us over in 2 of the last 5 elections. But all of this is taking on a greater urgency right now. As they look toward 2020, Republicans see an election with the potential to profoundly degrade their power, both in Washington and at the state level. President Trump is extremely unpopular, with approval ratings that have long hovered around 40%. Even more threatening, the 2016 election increasingly looks like the last gasp of the monochromatic Republican coalition, its final opportunity to win a national election with almost no non-white votes. The 2018 elections offer Republicans a frightening preview of the future. Newly released census data shows that turnout spiked among young people, rising from 20% in the last midterm election in 2014 to 36% in 2018 among those under 30. It also rose proportionately more among those with higher educations and those living in metropolitan areas, both of which favor Democrats. Obviously, the circumstances of every election are different, but all the demographic trends favor Democrats as the country grows more ethnically diverse. Wouldn't that be a great euphemism for explaining why it is that Trump feels justified in lying so viciously about everything? Well, he's ethically diverse. That's a very Kellyanne Conway way of it. I thought I thought Democrats were for diversity. She'll say that by the end of the week. All right. So all the demographic trends favor Democrats as the country grows more ethnically diverse, more urban, more educated, and less religious with each passing year. Maybe. That means that every election, Republicans have to do something more than they did the last time in order to win. Something. I wonder what that something might be. They could do that by expanding their appeal, reaching out to voters in new ways so that they don't depend so much on a shrinking white, older Christian electorate. Perhaps someday they will, though it will have to wait until after Trump is gone, since he worked so hard to restrict his focus to the party's existing base. In the meantime, Republicans have decided that if democracy is working against them, they'll work against democracy. So there, take that, democracy. So I mentioned that there's another incident to add to the list, and I'll grab it here from over at Daily Kos. I mentioned to you that it was David Neer putting this one together. Michigan Republicans threatened to impeach, I can't believe I said that word, threatened to impeach Democratic Attorney General because they lost the election. Again, more projection. They think that we're after impeaching Donald Trump because we lost the election versus, I don't know, enormous Mueller report full of evidence of any number of impeachable offenses. But Michigan, not so much. The Republican Party has, in the Trump era, David begins, ever more frequently announced its rejection of the basic tenets of democracy. And the Michigan GOP is at the vanguard of this authoritarian lurch. Sounds like a video clip from the Addams Family, I guess. But all right. Its latest move, threatening the state's newly and duly elected Democratic Attorney General with impeachment because she's refused to go along with its ultra-conservative agenda. Last year, Michigan voters chose Democrat Dana Nessel to serve as their top law enforcement official, investing her with all the powers of the office of Attorney General. But Republicans couldn't stomach that loss. In the lame duck session of the legislature following the midterms, Republican lawmakers passed a series of power grabs deliberately designed to undermine Democrats who had, in fact, swept every statewide office. And I did notice, now I'm reminded, that Paul Waldman's list didn't include all of the other incidents we've previously discussed in different state legislatures where Democrats won statewide office and they sought to strip powers of all sorts from newly elected governors. I don't know, some states may be lieutenant governors where they might elect them separately. But attorneys general certainly have made the list in a number of these states as well. This just one more example of the same. Now, back to David's article here. One of those measures was squarely aimed at Nessel, who broke a 16-year Republican grip on the Attorney General's post. That measure would have allowed GOP legislators to intervene at taxpayer expense in litigation where Nessel declined to defend the state. In other words, some of their stupid policies get challenged in court, and rather than attempt to defend these ridiculous policies, the state attorney general says, no, we'll decline, we'll settle the case because I just don't believe in the position they're trying to force me to represent here. Such cases would include, for instance, an ongoing lawsuit against Michigan's gerrymandered electoral maps. That was what Paul Waldman had mentioned, which a federal judge just ruled violate the Constitution, if you care about that old piece of paper. The outgoing governor, Rick Snyder, wound up vetoing the bill, But his furious fellow Republicans have only grown angrier ever since. The GOP's latest budget proposal would cut funds for Nessel's office, a move Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey openly admitted is designed to apply legislative pressure to the Attorney General. But pressure to do what? Republicans can't tolerate the fact that since taking office, Nessel has settled a lawsuit over a GOP-backed law that had allowed adoption agencies to refuse to work with same-sex couples, barring further state funding for such agencies, established a new hate crimes unit, and announced she would not enforce the state's existing abortion ban should Roe v. Wade be overturned. Republicans in the legislature got very used to having their own lapdog attorney general for all those years, someone who'd go to the mat defending every extremist law they passed, no matter how radical or unconstitutional. Now that they instead are faced with an independent voice in Nessel, they're frothing to bring her to heel, and there's no method they won't pursue. Should Nessel continue to follow her conscience and exercise her prosecutorial discretion, Shirkey issued a dark threat. Michigan's Constitution provides for the opportunity to impeach an elected officer, like Attorney General, he warned in a radio interview this week. Fortunately, it takes 2/3 vote in the Michigan Senate, just as it does in the U.S. Senate, to remove an impeached official from office, and Republicans only hold 22 of the chamber's 38 seats, well short, if you can believe it, of the supermajority they'd need. But this kind of toxic intimidation, even if it won't succeed in ousting Nessel, nevertheless serves to undermine the rule of law and sends the ugly message that democratic outcomes need not be respected if they aren't to a particular faction's liking. Now, that's now a core pillar of the GOP's belief system, and it's a serious danger to our democracy. So, well put. That is true. How many would you need in order to have 2/3 of 38? That does seem like, that's not that far short. I mean, it says well short of the majority. They hold 22 of 38, and I guess to make 2/3 you'd need 26. 25.3 is 2/3. Did I do that math right? 38 divided by 3 is 12 and 2/3. Times 2 is 25 and 1/3, so you'd have to round up 26. That's 4 votes, 4 seats shy of a supermajority. I don't know. I mean, I guess in a chamber of only 38 seats, 4 is pretty huge. It's more than 10%, so that distorts things. 38 seats. All right. Well, he's not wrong, and I wouldn't believe in a million years that David hadn't done the math before writing that. But I was just sort of curious, like, how many do you have to have anyway? Well, we hope it never gets there. Okay. Let's see. Other things to round up. Just stay awake, computer. There's really no reason to take so many naps during the show. I'll catch up with some comments that others have sent along. I think I retweeted for Greg to see that Bobble Speak, Culture of Truth, had chimed in earlier in the show when Greg had mentioned that Trump was a fabulist, retweeting his own mention of exactly that label from back in October, saying Trump is a fabulist. This isn't rocket science. And indeed, it's not. Remembering it, that's the rocket science. But now that we've been reminded, it isn't. Rocket science is one of those things like, I guess, Schrodinger's cat. Sometimes it is rocket science, and then when you figure it out, it's no longer rocket science. It just depends on your understanding it. Well, unless you're a rocket scientist, in which case it's still, you should understand rocket science, but it takes on a different character. Michael Musson had observed that, it's like Trump gathered the cows in Wisconsin, wrapped them in lovely blankets, and then executed them. Yes, it's true. Depends. The real lie is here, whether or not they were beautifully wrapped. Karen had sent this earlier, and I answered it on Twitter, but I guess we never discussed it on the air. Let's see. What were we talking about here? She had said, I wonder, does the House have to call them impeachment hearings. This was, I guess she passed this on when Greg was saying, they don't. And I guess here, passing it along just to point out, oh yeah, I did bring that up earlier, and they shouldn't call them impeachment hearings. Can't they just continue with their current investigations, having them televised, and deem their findings probative of impeachment prior to a vote on impeachment? And the answer is, of course, yes. And therefore, that is a good suggestion, Karen and Greg. And they probably plan to do exactly that. Rebecca Romans had a couple of comments, too. What's this? Maybe some more stories to explore. Hooray for New York State, she tells us, sending us Jeffrey Levin's tweet. Trump accuses New York State of trying to take down the NRA. Well, they're doing a pretty good job taking themselves down. I guess we should open that up just to see what are they up to and can we help. Let's see. I'm curious about that. Let's take a look. Trump accuses New York State of trying to take down the NRA. Whose work are we reading here? Reuters reporter, how would you pronounce that? Doina? D-O-I-N-A. Doina. Donna? I don't know. Maybe it's Gaelic and I can't pronounce. I don't know. And the last name is Chiaku. Boy, I bet you anything I'm not even close on that. D-O-I-N-A-C-H-I-C-U. And I don't know. Something makes me want to think that's like Chiakchu or something. But more important than his, I don't know, than the name. Boy, this is awful. I should just read you the content. And who cares, man? Labels. We don't buy into all that stuff. We just want the content. U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday accused New York State officials of trying to take down the NRA as the powerful gun rights group faces internal divisions and allegations of financial improprieties. You'll remember, I think we made some mention at the end of the week of the fight between Wayne LaPierre and his faction and Oliver North and his faction. I guess each one accusing the other of stealing all the money. And I don't really care who steals all the NRA money, just so long as it's stolen, I guess. If it makes it impossible for the group to operate, if they're stealing it and then just funneling it back in, then or into some other pro-gun efforts, which is almost assuredly what's happening, then we can't be so happy about that. Oh, let's see what's up. New York's Attorney General Letitia James said on Saturday her office has launched an investigation related to the NRA, and she has issued subpoenas as part of the investigation, but she declined further comment. The Times reported the probe relates to the group's tax-exempt status. Very interesting. The NRA is under siege, they say, by New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and the New York State AG, who are illegally, using the state's legal apparatus. It can happen. But all right. Illegally using the state's legal apparatus to take down and destroy this very important organization and others. It must get its act together quickly, stop the internal fighting, and get back to greatness fast, Trump said in a Twitter post. No wonder it was so dumb. It was a Trump comment. Representatives from the governor and attorney general's office did not respond to requests for comment. Retired U.S. Marine Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North said on Saturday he'll step down as the NRA president, adding he was being forced out because of his allegations that NRA leaders engaged in financial improprieties. His departure came after NRA chief executive Wayne LaPierre accused North of trying to oust him by threatening to release damaging information about him, according to a letter from LaPierre to NRA board members that was published by the Wall Street Journal on Friday. The NRA board was scheduled to meet on Monday, I guess that'd be today, to debate the next steps, according to media reports. The NRA, with a false claim of more than 5 million members, I guess you should say, is the most powerful, they think, and well-connected, they say, gun lobby in the United States. This is just press release material here. I don't know what it's doing in Reuters write-up. NRA officials didn't respond to requests for comment. Trump has embraced the gun lobby, vowing not to tighten U.S. firearms laws and advocating proposals such as arming teachers as a way of preventing school shootings. Yeah, it's a bad way, by the way. The NRA was having its annual meeting in Indianapolis over the weekend. And the NRA spent $30.3 million to support Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. That's a good point. Glad we brought that one up. And I think that's the end of that particular article. So, okay, I'm sure they're all working hard to use illegal legal systems to take them down. Where were we? There were some other comments that Rebecca had sent our way, including the question of the president having surpassed the 10,000 lies mark, according to the papers, asking, what kind of gift do you buy for celebrating the 10,000th lie? I'm thinking something stinky. That could be good. And one more note here from Rebecca. What a surprise, said no one. The appeals tweet here is retweeted in Rebecca's comment. Says, last week the FBI arrested Larry Hopkins, leader of the armed right-wing militia group United Constitutional Border Patriots. Yes. Now, troubling evidence has emerged that shows U.S. Customs and Border Patrol were actually working with the UCBP. That's true also. And we might as well take note of the attached article just to let you know what's going on there. I grabbed at some point a J.J. McNabb tweet and I think tweet thread about what was going on with those guys. And the larger picture, I think I mentioned to you the other day, was she was pointing out how many Republican elected officials were fraternizing with and endorsing and promoting organizations like this one and others that do, well, similar run kidnapping programs. And I still, by the way, have not seen, although I haven't spent enough time investigating, are there reports out there, if you've got one, I'd love for you to share it with me, that tell us what the disposition of these kidnappings are. I've seen incredible numbers claimed about this particular border militia whose leader was arrested. The numbers of migrants and asylum seekers that they are kidnapping, and lots of good outraged reporting, justifiably outraged reporting about it. But I'm curious what happens to the people. Do they turn them over to Customs and Border Patrol? Do they try to deport them themselves? Do they disappear somehow into the system? Are they trafficking in these people? I don't know what happens, and I think that's a serious and important question. Anytime I hear about migrants being detained on the southern border, my first instinct these days is to think that they're being trafficked and there are people who are kidnapping them and exploiting them. And so far, honestly, there hasn't been a great deal of evidence that that's wrong. All right, let's take a look at the work attached here, the appeal. Debbie Nathan writes, Border Patrol in New Mexico stood by as right-wing militia terrorized migrants. Not hard to believe. I think there's a lot of overlap, actually, between the two groups. Video and audio posted by the group and its supporters on social media raise questions about agency's role. National and international media crackled this month with reports that the United Constitutional Patriots, an armed right-wing paramilitary group, was detaining migrants as they crossed from Mexico to the U.S. in southern New Mexico. In an April 18th news release, that state's ACLU affiliate called the group an armed fascist military organization and characterized its detention of migrants as kidnapping, which is correct. It also publicized a damning video of the paramilitaries in action in the desert, rounding up scores of migrants, including children, and shining bright lights in their faces. 2 days later, the FBI arrested United Constitutional Patriots leader Larry Hopkins, a.k.a., and this is interesting, he's got an alias, Johnny Horton Jr. Why? I don't know. On a firearms charge. The FBI has since said that the United Constitutional Patriots had once, according to Hopkins, planned to kill former President Barack Obama, George Soros, I don't know if you've heard about him or what religion he belongs to, and Hillary Clinton. The national media jumped on the story within hours after the ACLU distributed its news release, but according to a YouTube audio post, the group set up its camp almost 2 months earlier, in late February. By March, its members were openly detaining migrants at the border with the seeming cooperation of the U.S. Border Patrol. The audio recorded by the UCP in early March reveals the Border Patrol stepping in to apprehend migrants after UCP rounded them up, and 3 videos posted in March and early April show the same thing. That answers, in part, our question about the disposition of the people that they kidnapped. When contacted for this story about the evidence of their apparent cooperation with the militia, Customs and Border Protection, the federal agency that includes the Border Patrol, sent an official statement saying it, quote, does not endorse or condone private groups or organizations taking enforcement matters into their own hands. But if you do, we don't mind, I guess. The UCP is based in rural northern New Mexico, where the group's, quote, commander, Horton, lives. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center's Hate Watch blog, the UCP is an outgrowth of right-wing paranoia about so-called caravans. Oh, who whips up frenzies about that? Caravans of Central American migrants. Rather than seeing these migrants as victims of violence and extreme poverty who are seeking safety in the U.S., the UCP fears them as invaders, according to the group's own social media. Their posts suggest that the group's members see it as their patriotic duty to patrol the border with arms to impede illegal migration and save America from destruction. The UCP's members are lavish enthusiasts of social media. In New Mexico, they have photographed, audio recorded, and live streamed much of what they've been doing near the desert base camp, a few yards from the border, just south of the New Mexico town of Sunland Park. The group's social media suggests that after arriving to the area in late February, it began operations as the United Constitutional Patriots New Mexico Border Ops. Sunland Park Police Chief Javier Guerra told the Appeal that he got a call around that time from the Border Patrol informing him that the militia was operating near the border. Guerra visited the group's camp and told its members they could not detain people or do any other kind of law enforcement. The group said it would not, according to Guerra. He said he did not know it was detaining people until the national news broke. But long before that, the paramilitaries were contravening what they'd told the police chief. They began to post material recording their detentions and handovers of migrants to the Border Patrol. On his March 8th online radio show, UCP leader Horton invited the audience to follow the process with migrants whom a female militia member had just detained. Call it in, a woman's voice is heard saying on the show. Okay, Horton responds. Hang on a minute, folks. I have to call it in to the Border Patrol. You are seeing firsthand how this works. If it was real. Horton then is heard dialing a phone number. A male voice answers. Yes, sir, Horton says. We have a group of illegals we just caught. So we need somebody to come out and take them off our hands, sir. Okay, how many do you have? The voice asks. There's several. Because we can't count. Okay, I'll swing by there. Okie dokie. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Okay, folks, Horton tells his audience, now you just witnessed what we do and how we do it. They went out, they caught them, they're videoing it right now. By April, the Facebook page of Jim Benvey, UCP New Mexico Border Ops' spokesperson, and the page of Debbie Farnsworth Collins, who also appears to be an active member of the group, were clotted with videos that feature men in camouflage clothing, carrying guns and other weapons, and with their faces masked, because they're heroes. In multiple videos, 3 of which are described in detail below, militia members confront migrants, order them to march, and to sit and stand over them until the Border Patrol arrives. Benvey and armed men in camouflage then remain on the scene with Border Patrol agents as they begin to process the migrants. Meanwhile, Benvey offers live-streamed commentary about the dangers to America of an immigrant invasion. Benvey confirmed to the Appeal and to the Washington Post that he is a member of UCP. He said he shot the videos and published them on his Facebook page. In one video, after Benvey spots a group of migrants climbing a hill, he says that he wants to cut these ones off. He yells, "Alto," which they say is Spanish for stop. Okay. As he runs after the frightened people. Alto? Is that really true? I don't know. Okay, well, anyway, according to a screaming, stumbling woman with a suitcase. Oh, I'm sorry, including. But probably also according to a screaming, stumbling woman with a suitcase on his side as well. Border Patrol agents arrive, and Benvie makes clear to them that he has been pursuing the migrants. "I didn't want to chase them too hard," he says. "I have a feeling if we got a look at him, we would find out that he couldn't chase them very hard either." We'll be right back after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I will skip down a little bit here. There's more examples of videotaped episodes in which these militia, so-called militia folks, are apprehending migrants and mistreating them. And no surprise, of course, and lots of braggadocio as well. But I thought this part at the end was kind of interesting. On April 23rd, 5 days after the national media began reporting on the paramilitaries in New Mexico, the UCP were evicted from their camp. It turns out that they'd been trespassing on private land. Oh no! That land is bleak and scrubby, bounded by train tracks, lumbering freight trains, and a poverty-stricken neighborhood just over the border in Mexico, where kids play outside and buses drop off men, women, teens, children, and babies who are preparing to cross the international line and seek asylum. The appeal visited the camp before the eviction. The paramilitaries gathered there, this is the interesting part, declined to be interviewed, as is their right, I suppose, and said that photography of their camp and members was not allowed. I, of course, wonder by what authority they say it's not allowed, as they weren't even protecting their own private property. They were trespassing on someone else's. But okay, they just say things and you're supposed to listen to them, mostly because they have guns. Meanwhile, over the hill, a group of 18 women and children suddenly appeared. They walked past an ear-splitting freight train, scrambled over the tracks, and stood at attention before a Border Patrol agent. "You are in the United States now," he said, as a Border Patrol truck pulled up. Of course, if they were seeking asylum, then, they would be looking for a Border Patrol agent, not seeking to avoid them, so whatever. Anyway, just an interesting story, an interesting end, an interesting note to that story, that, get out of here, get out of our country, you don't have any right to be here, they said, while trespassing on someone else's private land. Wow. Well, that's just, I don't know what to tell you. That's just the way they work. They don't pay any attention to rules for themselves. No surprise there. Okay, let's see. A couple other stories that caught my attention over the weekend, some of which ended up in Pocket and some of which remain in my tweet stream. One of which that was rather annoying, I saw Joan point out in response to Stephen Wolf's pointing out, when Marco Rubio pointed out. You see what's going on here? Marco Rubio, over the, end of the week into the weekend, was reported in The Hill and other places, but Stephen Wolf grabs The Hill's version of it. Rubio says hackers penetrated Florida elections system. So we'll read you The Hill's story, and then we'll read you the more important reactions to that story. Rubio says hackers penetrated Florida election systems. That's an important one. Senator Marco Rubio told the New York Times on Friday, I could just read you the Times, I suppose. I'll see if I can find the link to it, that Tal Axelrod used to summarize things for The Hill. Rubio's comments came a week after, did I finish the sentence? Rubio told the New York Times on Friday that hackers penetrated a Florida county's elections system in 2016. Rubio's comments come a week after special counsel Robert Mueller's report revealed that Russians sent malicious software to Florida county government officials overseeing the 2016 election. That would have been in an attempt to penetrate the systems, and Marco Rubio says he's since found out, I guess, or had found out earlier, more likely, but didn't say anything, that they had actually succeeded in penetrating the county's election system. Rubio, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, told the Times that there was an intrusion into a county's elections system, but that the target or targets were not notified. He said national security officials opted to use a blanket warning about hacking efforts as a way to protect intelligence methods. Everybody has been told what it is they need to do to protect themselves from the intrusion, Rubio said. I don't believe the specific victims of the intrusion have been notified. The concern was that in a number of counties across the country, there are a couple of people with the attitude of, we've got this, we don't need your help, we don't think we need to do what you are telling us we need to do. That doesn't really make any sense in terms of not notifying anybody, but sources and methods does. Rubio told the newspaper that the hackers were in a position to change voter roll data, but it does not appear they did so. My biggest concern is that on election day, you go to vote and you have mass confusion because voter registration information has been deleted from the systems, he said. Rubio and former Senator Bill Nelson wrote a letter to Florida's top elections official last year, calling on him to seek federal assistance in securing the state's elections systems. A spokesperson for Senator Rick Scott of Florida told The Hill on Friday that the FBI has reached out and is working on scheduling a briefing with Senator Scott in the next few weeks to brief him and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis about the hacking detailed in Mueller's report. Scott, who was governor during the 2016 election campaign, sent a letter to the FBI last week asking it to confirm the hacking. For his part, DeSantis has expressed frustration with what he says is a lack of transparency from federal authorities. They won't tell us which county it was. Are you kidding me? He said at a Thursday press conference in Miami. Why would you have not said something immediately? And the answer is because they thought you guys were morons and leakers and wouldn't be helpful and would probably say something stupid that would spoil it for efforts to find out where else it might have been happening. Anyway, the more important, I think, takeaway from this was Stephen Wolf's observation that Republicans and some in the media criticized Democratic Senator Bill Nelson for saying this last year before he lost by 10,000 votes to that very same Rick Scott. Funny how Republican Senator Marco Rubio did nothing to stand by his Senate colleague then. That is interesting, isn't it? And it points to David Neer's entry over at Daily Kos about this appearing in the Mueller report. FBI backs up former senator's claim that Russians hacked Florida's election systems. Now, as Joan put it at the beginning of this chain of custody of this thing here, she points out not only did Republicans and some in the media criticize Bill Nelson for saying this, well, the Washington Post gave Nelson the very same treatment that we were discussing at the top of the show. The Post gave Nelson 4 Pinocchios, rating it a whopper. Rick Scott said Nelson was being irresponsible for saying such a thing. Marco Rubio, of course, let his colleague hang out to dry with his refusal to confirm it and left the election systems vulnerable to Russian hackers. And lo and behold, Nelson did, in fact, lose that election. And golly, if that didn't help them quite a bit. Another Republican senator who insisted on remaining silent about Russian meddling because it would help him politically. Joan points to her own story from just a few days after David's. Should I go through these in order? I guess this April 19th story from David first. The Mueller report, FBI backs up former senators' claims that Russians hacked Florida's election systems. That being, I guess, the request, at least from Rick Scott. I don't know if that's the response we're talking about here, but Rick Scott asked for confirmation, and I guess they're giving it, whether directly or indirectly before he even made the request, by responding to Bill Nelson. Mother Jones reporter Pema Levy points out that one key line in Robert Mueller's findings buttress former Democratic Senator Bill Nelson's assertion last year that Russian military hackers had compromised Florida's elections systems. And a quote here that reads, "We understand the FBI believes that this operation enabled the GRU to gain access to the network of at least one Florida county government." I don't know whether that's a quote from Mother Jones quoting from the Mueller report, but that's what it appears to be. At the time, Nelson, who was up for re-election, was bitterly derided for his warning, which he said was based on classified information. As Levy puts it, Republicans and the media alike painted his comments as dangerous make-believe. Interesting. I would like to know which media painted it as dangerous make-believe, and I guess that the answer is in the next paragraph. The Washington Post's fact checker. Dangerous make-believe for Pinocchios. They wrap the babies so beautifully, and then they execute the babies. Not really sure what to say with that one. I don't know what the Washington Post made of that one, but we know what the New York Times made of it. And sometimes conflating them is wrong, and sometimes it's just not that far from the mark. Let's see. That even among, I guess, the media and Republicans painting his comments as dangerous make-believe, that even included the Washington Post's fact checker, closed in scare quotes here, awarding 4 Pinocchios to Nelson, insisting not a single speck of evidence backs him up. And we have serious doubts whether the classified information he cites even exists. But even if the press were to walk this back now, reporters carried water for the GOP by undermining the credibility of anyone who might sound a similar alarm in the future. And while we don't know whether Putin's hackers were able to manipulate the election, it's important to remember just how close Nelson's election was. He lost to Republican Rick Scott by just 10,000 votes out of 8.2 million cast statewide, a margin of only 0.1%. So, there you go. There is that. And how annoying is that? I should take a look at how they did the 4 Pinocchios thing, too. But first, Jones' own take on all of this, written just this Saturday. That time, Marco Rubio knew Russians could change election results in Florida and refused to say so. In the summer of 2018, during the heated election campaign for Senator Bill Nelson's Florida Senate seat, Nelson warned that Russian hackers had penetrated some of his state's county voting systems. He said of the Russians that all they have to do, if those elections records are not protected, is go in and start eliminating registered voters, like about 10,000, say. The warning was confirmed by intelligence officials who said that there was a classified basis for the claim, but at the time, the extent and seriousness of the threat remains unclear, shrouded for reasons of national security. I'm curious, when did they make that confirmation versus when did he get his 4 Pinocchios? Let's see. The link here says, Bill Nelson wasn't making things up when he said Russians hacked Florida's systems. That's a link to NBC News' story of August 17th, 2018. The fact checker of the Washington Post on the same date, August 17th. What do you know? So on one hand, the August 17th dateline, 2:19 p.m. The hours might become important here. NBC News reporting under the headline, Nelson wasn't making things up when he said this. The Washington Post, no timestamp on this, but an August 17th article headlined, "Has Russia hacked into Florida's election system? There is no evidence," by Salvador Rizzo. R-I-Z-Z-O. I don't know whether he says Rizzo or Rizzo, but probably says Rizzo. Anyway, good. I'm glad I mispronounced his name. What's the write-up of it say? There's a exchange and quotes from Nelson. And the write-up says, this warning from Nelson that Russia has breached election systems in Florida and may purge voters from the rolls seems to confirm some of the worst fears about vulnerabilities in the U.S. election infrastructure. Nelson and Senator Marco Rubio sent a letter to Florida election officials on July 2nd, reminding them that Russian government actors targeted our election infrastructure during the 2016 elections and urging them to seek resources from the Department of Homeland Security to boost security for the state's upcoming primary and general elections. But then Nelson, who's up for re-election in November, took things further in public comments. He has said repeatedly and unequivocally since August 7th that Russia has access to election systems in Florida and could eliminate individual voters' records. This is far more alarming and detailed than the warning in Nelson and Rubio's joint letter. Let's see, I guess quoting from Nelson some more, and then their conclusion here. We want to be clear here. This fact check is not about the U.S. intelligence community's assessment and the bipartisan consensus that Russia plans to interfere in the 2018 elections as it did in 2016. It is about Nelson's specific claim that Russia has access to voter rolls in Florida. The Department of Homeland Security, top election officials in Florida, and election officials in several of the most populous counties in the state have said they have no evidence that Russia has access to Florida's election systems. So they go on to deride him, and let's see, I guess down at the bottom, this is a very lengthy article, and then they come to the conclusion, 4 Pinocchios. Without minimizing the threat of Russian interference in this year's elections, we give Nelson's claim 4 Pinocchios. Meanwhile, like I said, NBC News, same day, perhaps later, reports from Ken Delanian, Bill Nelson has reaped the political whirlwind in the 10 days since he proclaimed that Russian hackers had penetrated some of the state's county voting systems. The governor of Florida, Rick Scott, a Republican who's running against Nelson, has blasted his claim as irresponsible. The top Florida elections official, also a Republican, said he sees no indication that it's true. The Washington Post weighed in on Friday with a 717 word fact check that all but accused Nelson without evidence of making it up. How is it that they're both dated the same? Can I double check that? They are, August 17th. Yes, August 17th. I don't know. That's very interesting, but they say, I guess it happened earlier. However, 3 people familiar with the intelligence tell NBC News that there is a classified basis for Nelson's assertion, which he made at a public event, even after being given information from the leaders of the Senate Intelligence Committee. The extent and seriousness of the threat remains unclear, shrouded for reasons of national security. The episode illustrates the extent to which secrecy, politics, and state-federal rivalries can stand in the way of a unified response to the threat from Russian attacks on a diffuse U.S. election system run by state and local officials. Through a spokesman, Nelson declined to comment. There is, of course, much more. I want to jump back to Jones' summation of things. Like she said, the warnings were confirmed by intelligence officials who said there was a classified basis for the claim. But at the time, the extent and seriousness of the threat remains unclear, like we said, shrouded for reasons of national security. But Nelson's opponent and the eventual victor in the race, then Governor Rick Scott, called that claim irresponsible and said he shouldn't be talking about it publicly. Nelson's Senate counterpart, Marco Rubio, a Republican on the Senate Intelligence Committee, joined him in signing on to a letter urging elections officials to be aware of the potential for hacking and avail themselves on federal assistance to available federal assistance, but wouldn't warn them of the extent of the problem. Rubio knew from his position on SSCI, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, as much as Nelson, a member of the Homeland Security Committee. He knew Russia could infiltrate the voting system up to the extent that they could alter election results, but he refused to back up Nelson in 2018. A year later, he's conceding that reality because the Mueller report revealed that the FBI believes that this operation enabled the GRU to gain access to the network of at least one Florida county government. Now, Rubio is going even further, telling the New York Times in a Friday interview that Russian hackers hadn't just accessed a voting system, but were in a position, as he puts it, to change the voter rolls. In 2018, Rubio refused to confirm or deny Nelson's claims. He knew as much as Nelson knew, and while Nelson was being pilloried in the national press, after getting 4 Pinocchios, for instance, they're rating for a Whopper, and now, a year after the fact, Rubio is confirming with the Times that Russian hackers not only accessed the Florida voting system, but were in a position to change voter roll data. Way too little and way too late, Marco. This is the guy who still thinks he can run for president again someday based on his foreign policy expertise, Joan reminds us. Good call, Joan. All right, let's see. Switching back and trying to find a few other things that we might share before closing things out for the day. Lots of good stuff, but let me see what I've got in pocket, see what stories I might be missing that I want to bring you up to speed on before closing the books on Monday. Let's see. Another big topic of conversation, and probably one we can spend some time on tomorrow unless events surpass it. Lots of discussion in the Washington Post on Rod Rosenstein and what a survivor he appears to be. The survivor label being used again like it was earlier on Betsy DeVos. Maybe that's what turned me off to reading the original reporting on DeVos, more survivor stories. I can land the plane. That's the pull quote. How Rosenstein tried to mollify Trump, protect Mueller, and save his job. Definitely walking a tightrope here, but a less than flattering portrayal of Rod Rosenstein heading into the weekend. And a lot of people talking about that. To give you a flavor for it, in case you somehow missed it because you were doing all the things that I wasn't doing this weekend, watching the important cultural touchstone films and television shows. Rod Rosenstein, again, was in danger of losing his job. That seemed to happen fairly frequently, too. And I now begin to wonder, after this story, whether Rod Rosenstein was the one leaking rumors that he might be losing his job so that people would think, oh, well, if Trump's attacking him and seeking to boot him from the job again, this must mean he's a good guy and on our side. This, by the way, the reporting of Matt Zapotosky, I guess, Josh Dawsey, and Devlin Barrett. So Rosenstein, again, in danger of losing his job. The New York Times had just reported that, remember this one? In the heated days after James Comey was fired as FBI director, the Deputy Attorney General had suggested wearing a wire to surreptitiously record President Trump. Now, Trump, traveling in New York, was on the phone, eager for an explanation. Rosenstein, who by one account had gotten teary-eyed just before the call in a meeting with Trump's chief of staff, sought to defuse the volatile situation and assure the president he was on his team. According to people familiar with the matter, he criticized the Times report, published in late September, and blamed it on former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, whose recollections formed its basis. He then talked about Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of Russia's interference in the election and told the president he would make sure Trump was treated fairly. People familiar with the conversation said, "I give the investigation credibility," Rosenstein said. Wow. According to an administration official with knowledge of what was said during the call, I can land the plane. And that's what had people wondering, what exactly does he mean by this? The episode illustrates the political tightrope. See, Rosenstein has had to walk in his 2 years as Justice Department's second in command. To keep his job, the deputy AG has worked to mollify an often angry Trump, while at the same time protecting the special counsel's investigation of the president and his campaign. Rosenstein's actions have come under renewed scrutiny, as he has played a key role in releasing Mueller's findings in a way even some of his supporters say has been overly favorable to Trump. In a statement for this article, Rosenstein said, "The only commitment I made to President Trump about the Russia investigation is the same commitment I made to the Congress. As so long as I was in charge, it would be conducted appropriately and as expeditiously as possible. Everyone who actually participated in the investigation knows that." He added, "My relationship with the president is not one-dimensional," although I don't know if there's any such thing as a two-dimensional Trump relationship. "The Russia investigation represents only a fraction of my work and the work of the Department of Justice. I talk with the president at every opportunity about the great progress we have made and are making at the Department of Justice in achieving the administration's law enforcement priorities and protecting American citizens." A person familiar with Rosenstein's account said the Deputy Attorney General disputes that he was teary-eyed in the meeting before the call with Trump. He was reacting appropriately given the circumstances, which was a discussion about his forced resignation, the person said. It's not even that good of a job, quite honestly. I mean, pay-wise. But people aspire to it for a long time, so they get sentimental about it. Rosenstein, whose representatives were approached for comment for this report earlier in the week, acknowledged in a combative speech Thursday night in New York that there were times during his tenure as deputy AG when he grew upset. One silly question that I get from reporters is it true that you got angry and emotional a few times over the past few years? You think really people ask that? Heck, yes. Didn't you? Rosenstein said, deviating from his prepared script. Trump ended the call with Rosenstein thinking he was, quote, on the team after all, one senior administration official said, adding that the president has been further swayed by Rosenstein's deference in meetings and other settings. So supplicate yourself and you'll make it. On multiple occasions, according to people familiar with the matter, Rosenstein told Trump he was not a target of Mueller's investigation, using law enforcement jargon that can refer to people about whom the Justice Department has gathered substantial evidence of criminal wrongdoing. Mueller's report makes clear that investigators focused on Trump. His attorneys were informed he was a subject, a different bureaucratic term, meaning his conduct was being investigated, and Mueller's report details conduct that legal observers have said could constitute obstruction of justice. Rosenstein also told the president more than once that he agreed Trump was being treated unfairly, though one person familiar with the matter said Rosenstein was probably referring to media coverage rather than the investigation itself. That person, like others in this article, spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive internal government deliberations. In his speech on Thursday, Rosenstein launched a blistering attack on the media, an offensive likely to hearten Trump. Some of the nonsense that passes for breaking news today would not be worth the paper it was printed on if anybody bothered to print it, he said. He also criticized the Obama administration for not publicizing the, quote, full story about Russian hacking and social media influence operations, and cited a quote from Trump to make a point about a rule of law, the rule of law. That seems like a bad selection, don't you think? Rosenstein, who appointed Mueller as special counsel after Comey's firing, is no stranger to political blows from the right, from the left, and from the man who nominated him for the job. At the end of Mueller's probe, though, Rosenstein might have been able to avoid some punches since the ultimate decisions would be up to Attorney General William Barr. Instead, he leaned in. Everyone loves that term. And by the way, where the whole weekend was marked by pictures of Donald Trump leaning in. I don't know if you've seen any of these, but we've mentioned before that he has that weird manner of standing, that leaning forward, but it's really getting crazy. Looks like he's going to fall over at any minute. All right. Not going to be able to conclude the entirety of the article, but I did want to let you know that we were aware of the story and it bears some further scrutiny, finding out more about just where Rod Rosenstein stands and what he did to preserve his power in his corner of the Trump universe. No surprise there. But I think, actually, I shouldn't say no surprise there. I think there were a lot of people who thought that he was performing more laudably in the role up until the moment they read this story. I don't know what the basis for that really was, but, maybe wishful thinking. I don't really know. Okay. Let's see. A couple other things we can save for Tuesday. Probably time best now to wrap things up and bring you up to speed on what's coming up next on Netroots Radio on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, because Justice Putnam's back channel to me through text chat is working. I can do that. And here you go. Starting off in the Bistro Cafe, Sarah Sanders, boo, and Kellyanne Conway, boo. Well, Sarah Sanders and Kellyanne Conway's entire job is to excuse me. That's interesting. All right. Very interesting. Is that a Trump quote? We'll find out. On the rest of the menu, Texas Republicans are forced by a court to admit their voter fraud panic was a lie. That's good. I'd love to see that. GOP Federalist Society judges launch a bizarre attack on Black Lives Matter and the First Amendment. And Facebook's newest fact-checkers are Koch-funded climate deniers. Boy, that's going to yield some great results. More after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Former U.S. Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, the person who was Rosenstein before Rosenstein was Rosenstein, said if Trump was not president, he would have been indicted. And despite opposition from China, the Pentagon sailed 2 U.S. Navy warships through the strategic Taiwan Strait. All that and more with Justice next.